have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
We don't even have to say his name for anyone to know who the civil rights leader was. Martin Luther King, even decades after his death, is still a household name and has a nationally celebrated holiday. Even through death, he reminds us to love and be compassionate towards one another.
Although we know the strides he made in the civil rights movement, most do not know the story behind the success. Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers serves to explain a portion of his success, but not entirely.
There are 3 lessons we can learn from the uber-successful lawyer Joe Flom: the importance of being Jewish, demographic luck, and meaningful work.
While Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Jew, the lesson of Joe Flom is still applicable to this situation. Flom experienced much anti-Semitism from the New York law firms, meaning he had to take on an undesirable cases of the century, proxy fights.
In MLK's era, Jim Crow laws were still in effect, enforcing racism against African Americans nationally. Although this can be seen as a disadvantage to be a black at the time when discrimination was an all-time high, MLK's adversity led him to be the champion of the underdogs.
In August of 1963, King led 250,000 people in the March on Washington to support civil rights and share his dream of equality.
The next lesson, demographic luck, pertains to the year MLK was born. He was born January 15, 1929, a prime year to become a civil rights leader. In fact, the year he was applying to college, Morehouse College had such a low number of students, anyone who could pass their admissions test was granted free tuition. Had he been born a year earlier or later, this lucky opportunity would not have been available.
The civil rights movement would not begin until the late 50s, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the Montgomery bus in 1955. This would place MLK at age 26, the prime age to become an activist. He was fresh out of college, obtaining his BD from Crozer Theological Seminary in 1955, ambitious and had enough life experience to be frustrated by racism, making MLK the epitome of demographic luck.
He was at the right place at the right time, being the new minister in the town of Montgomery. He organized a successful bus boycott that desegregated buses across the South and launched numbers of protests.
Joe Flom's last lesson, meaningful work, is especially applicable. With every speech MLK did, the civil rights movement grew, leading to the equality of his people.
In 1961, after his bus boycott, the Freedom Riders formed to ride on interstate buses, testing the segregated accommodations. The work MLK put in could be directly linked to numerous effects, making his work extremely meaningful and anything but monotonous.
Although many people argue his success was built off pure talent and drive, this was not the case. While those 2 factors did help, had he not been born in 1929, he would not have been able to attend Morehouse College, which consequentially would have prevented him from the many opportunities that followed soon thereafter, such as becoming pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery.
Gladwell also theorizes that 10,000 hours is minimum amount of practice a person needs in order to become a professional. In MLK's case, he had much practice, but 10,000 hours was very unlikely.
Growing up, both MLK's father and grandfather were pastors at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. Historians believe this experience undoubtedly contributed to his renowned oratorical style and cadence.
He grew up in the church listening to countless sermons and delivering sermons himself. Sources count that in just the 11 years after he graduated from college, he spoke at over 2,500 public events around the country. While no one can dispute his dedication, hard work, and talent, it is doubtful that his speaking skills were developed through 10,000 hours of practice, unless each of those 2,500 speeches were 4 hours long.
With less than the 10,000-hour recommendation, MLK especially disproved Gladwell's theory with his speech, I Have a Dream. This revolutionary speech is often quoted in modern society and helped unite a fractured nation. His command of rhetoric throughout the presentation disproves the 10,000-hour rule.
Martin Luther King Jr. further negates Gladwell's argument in his chapter of the ethnic theory of plane crashes, with his letter from a Birmingham jail. Gladwell provides the reasoning behind certain plane crashes is directly correlated to the pilot's native country's PDI, meaning Power Distance Index.
Gladwell states that America has one of the lowest PDIs in the world, but King, living as an inferior during his time, was not permitted to speak to white people as an equal. For example, a 1927 Jim Crow law in the state of Alabama prohibited integrated schools. Growing up under this restriction increased the PDI that MLK experienced between himself and the white race.
However, he leaped over this barrier numerous times in his life to fight for what he knew was right. Writing in his jail cell in 1963, MLK wrote the acclaimed Letter from a Birmingham Jail to his fellow clergymen, white and black alike, as equals. He stood up to these men by castigating them for sitting passively on the sidelines, while King and others risked everything agitating for a change. He was the fearless pilot of the civil rights movement, but despite Gladwell's predictions, his plane soared above everyone else and refused to crash.
Although Gladwell's points may be applicable to certain aspects of MLK's rise to the status of a national hero, he does not account for the degree of brevity and pure courage that ultimately skyrocketed King to become the champion of the 20th century civil rights movement.
And after Martin's, I was gonna call him Martin, and then I was like, we're not on a first name basis. Okay, stop.